New at 6 tonight, several Johnson City firefighters say morale is at an all-time low. After months of investigation, we found out low morale is one of the many things firefighters, including top management, mentioned on tape during an internal investigation last year.
Our community watchdog has listened to 13 hours of taped firefighter interviews, and despite the words that came out of even the assistant fire chief's mouth, the city manager told Nate Morabito he does not think that morale is a major problem.
That's right. In all, the city interviewed 24 firefighters over the course of several months last year for an internal investigation into alleged workplace harassment. I'm going to play just a sample of the firefighters' comments.
Unfortunately, we've become the laughingstock of fire departments in the country.
It seems like we're at rock bottom with morale in the fire department right now.
I think that our morale has never been lower.
It is low. It's extremely low.
I think that everyone reaches a breaking point, and I think that it's continuing going on, that a lot of these people have reached that breaking point.
After hearing the tapes, we asked the Johnson City Firefighters Association where morale stands.
I have not had any. I think there's always improvement for morale, absolutely.
There is no pressure on any of our employees to retire. That is some skills to our in-house folks to make them eligible.
Despite what you just heard there from the Firefighters Association, the city manager told us he doesn't think morale at the fire hall is any worse than any other city department.
I do not think it's that big of an issue. The work's getting done. We're getting high quality work done. And I've been in this organization for 26 years. And for every day that I have been in this organization, there has been a group in the fire department that has claimed that morale was bad and things were bad.
Pete Peterson told me just like any department in the city, you have some employees that love to come to work and are proud to be city employees, and then you have some employees that it's just a means to make a living. The city manager says he certainly doesn't think it's an epidemic as some in the fire department would like to present it to be. Still, I found out the city's made some changes to the promotional process to make sure firefighters know exactly what it takes for them to be promoted. In the past, that was not crystal clear. Firefighters have cited the promotional process as an issue in the past.
I'd like to see him gone from here.
I don't feel safe.
I really don't think that he's fit to be the chief.
Firefighters sound the alarm at City Hall about their leader. Within the last year, about 24 firefighters, including supervisors, went on record with concerns about Johnson City's fire chief.
And many of them mentioned threats, lack of trust, low morale. Community watchdog Nate Morabito found out city officials interviewed them as part of an internal investigation into alleged workplace harassment.
That investigation did not substantiate workplace harassment, but did find the chief possibly abused a subordinate. In the last 3 months, we've listened to more than 13 hours worth of taped interviews. Despite firefighters' concerns, the city manager says the chief has his full support. While firefighters battled flames last year, public records show they fought another battle internally.
I'm just nervous to come to work.
It all started with a workplace harassment complaint filed by Lieutenant Tommy Varan, alleging Mark Scott bullied, harassed, and threatened him over the course of 25 years. Once a candidate for captain and assistant chief positions, Varan told the city's investigator he wasn't happy with the department's promotion process, but said he and others had more serious concerns.
People are fed up and sick and tired of living in tyranny.
Over the course of several months last year, everyone from rookie firefighters to ranking officers shared their interactions with the chief. Several of them said Scott, a longtime department administrator, has a history of unprofessional behavior.
Cursing, you moron, you idiot.
Verbally berating firefighters, making fun of them, and in the years before he became chief, sometimes far worse.
We'd be sitting at the dinner table and he would talk about he could shoot someone and they would never hear the gun go off.
He did it sometimes jokingly and sometimes he was serious. He just didn't know how to take it.
I've seen him reload ammunition and stuff at work, and I've heard him tell employees, different people, that I'm putting a little extra in this and for you.
To some, the comments seemed harmless. To others, they were far from that.
When we have a meeting and stuff, I try to sit closest to the door.
He might say it in a jokingly way, but he means every word of it. I don't feel safe.
We didn't take it serious.
looking back, we should have.
Then there's this silent video, which shows Scott with a bullwhip, apparently laughing with firefighters. But one of them said in the moments before that video, he saw Scott take the joke to another level.
I have actually witnessed him chase an employee in the back parking lot with a bullwhip.
Throughout the years, firefighters said Scott's acted aggressively at fire scenes, sometimes getting physical. Since the city manager named him chief in 2011, firefighters said they have not heard death threats.
It's kind of always out of control.
But since 2011, other issues caught their attention.
He referred to Jerome as Gomer Paul the whole time that I worked over there.
Take his newest assistant chief, a man who previously served as captain.
I've heard people say that's what he calls me. He's never called me that in person.
There's also his speech to the city's newest firefighters in February 2015.
Talked about how I couldn't wait to get out of the department.
Several recruits recounted the meeting.
Could have been a little bit more motivating and positive.
Like the supposed threats, some rookies saw it as harmless, but others walked away discouraged.
We all kind of left a little shell-shocked.
It's no secret many of the firefighters in the department have had their issues with the chief in recent years, but they say he's always had a fair shot.
I'm not beyond feeling there's an organized approach to move me along.
He told the internal investigator he thinks a group of firefighters are mad at him for a variety of things and now want him gone.
If they want to hold a grudge toward me, that's up to them, but I want to go sleeping.
And he said he sleeps well.
Was there any seriousness to the threats? Or
There was nothing's happened.
The threats, he said, were nothing more than fire hall jokes.
If I said it, I was kidding about it.
Comments he says he hasn't made once since becoming chief. He said the comments about his new assistant fire chief were never meant to be hurtful.
Regretfully so, I said it. And Jerome is not that person.
The claims that he raised his voice and grabbed firefighters at fire scenes, he said if they did occur, it was all in the interest of trying to fight a fire and keep the public and his employees safe.
Who don't yell at a fire scene to get somebody to hear them?
And his comments to those new firefighters, he said he couldn't recall, but admitted if he could,
Would I like to retire? Absolutely.
he would walk out the door. He's technically not eligible for full retirement until March 2017.
Absolutely, we support the fire chief.
And it doesn't look like he's going anywhere before then. Do you think discipline was warranted in this matter?
No, I do not. Chief Scott and I have had a couple of discussions about it.
A memo reveals the city's internal investigation did not substantiate workplace harassment, but did find evidence that his use of profanity or abusive language may have violated the fire department's abuse of a subordinate code. The human resources director concluded many of the comments were the result of the fire department's culture, similar to that of a locker room.
I do not believe at all that Chief Scott has sincerely threatened anybody.
You don't find those comments unacceptable from a supervisor?
Those types of comments, now that we have a complaint about them, are not acceptable by anyone, including the firefighters.
This actually isn't the first time the city's received a complaint mentioning a threat. Records reveal in 2009, a firefighter said others heard Scott make similar comments.
Mark Scott denied having ever said it.
It reportedly went unfounded, but the city did warn Scott, even in a joking manner, it would not be tolerated. Despite the past and all of the firefighter comments, the city manager says he is not concerned about the department's leadership.
Fire chief has done an extraordinary job in increasing the service levels provided to the citizens, and our job number one is to ensure that we have quality services for the citizens of Johnson City.
Peterson says it's possible a vocal minority is trying to misrepresent the department and use the past to push this man out.
I don't think it's an epidemic as perhaps some of the folks in the Fire Bureau would like to present it to be.
But talk to the Johnson City Firefighters Association. Does the association support Chief Scott? And instead of a resounding show of support, there's mostly silence.
I'm not in a position to make that statement.
Christopher Ward says the internal investigation raised concerns.
There's definitely room for improvement.
And the association expects some kind of change as a result, especially since in this memo, HR promised possible internal actions and structural changes to improve efficiency, professionalism, and a greater sense of overall accountability. In the meantime, he says firefighters are just focused on keeping the public safe.
We're going to wait and see what the city recommends and form our own opinion at that time.
Nate, 8 months after that investigation, the Firefighters Association told you that they are not still aware of any changes. You asked the city manager about this?
Yeah, we did. And Pete Peterson, the city manager, told us the department's updated its requirements for promotion so that a firefighter knows exactly the correct career path. So it's crystal clear. He says the city's created another captain's position. It's also considering adding other supervisory positions and more training. I also want to mention we made multiple attempts to try and talk with Chief Scott for this story to get his side of the story, but through a city spokesperson, he declined an interview.
All right, Nate Morbido. Nate, thank you.
An internal investigation into Johnson City's fire chief did not substantiate workplace harassment, but we've since learned some of the chief's actions have contributed to one longtime, well-respected firefighter's mental health struggle.
Now, that sergeant gave community watchdog Nate Morbido access to some of his medical records that call out the chief.
His name is Sergeant Mike Sagers. Here he is right here. He says years of bullying, belittling, and workplace violence by longtime administrator and current fire chief Mark Scott have taken their toll on him. Instead of returning from stressful fire scenes to a supportive fire hall that helped him decompress, Sagers says the environment Scott sustained and exacerbated has added to his stress, so much so that for the time being, his doctor won't let him go back to work. The words in Sergeant Mike Sagers' personnel file show the value Johnson City's placed in him over his 25-year career with the fire department. Supervisors have praised his amazing work ethic, called him one of the very best drivers, and one of the best when it comes to interacting with the public, a man who's a pleasure to supervise. But what they didn't know about this lifelong firefighter is that for years, while he fought hundreds of fires, mentally he battled another one. Something he calls the fire within.
We had no idea.
His fellow firefighters say they didn't find out about his struggle until earlier this year.
It's very sad for someone that's been here and put that much time and effort in.
After the sergeant took extended medical leave. When you found out this year how serious of an issue it was, what was your reaction?
I was upset for Mike Sagers. I was upset for the fire service as a whole. You know, how could we let it get to that point? You know, how could administration and the city administration let it get to that point?
At his attorney's request, Sergeant Sagers declined an on-camera interview for this story, but he gave the Johnson City Professional Fire Association his blessing to speak on his behalf and gave us access to some of his medical records. Sagers told us the fire department forced him to disclose his confidential mental impairment in 2015 after an administrative change in sick time policy that required him to turn in a doctor's note and copay to his supervisors for every absence. He challenged the change by filing a discrimination complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission last year, taking family medical leave in the process. In March of this year, the EEOC closed and dismissed his case and told him he has a right to sue the city. Among other things, these psychotherapy progress notes mention words like abusive fire chief, harassment, concern of retaliation. At one point, they referenced the chief throwing things, comments to his doctor that Sagers was feeling tired, worn out, and exhausted. And then the notes mentioned something several other firefighters warned an internal investigator about in 2015. Fear Chief Mark Scott might shoot someone. In this particular case, him. Back when the city investigated the unfounded harassment claim, the chief brushed off any concerns in a recorded interview with an internal investigator, telling him the comments were never meant to be taken seriously.
If I said it, I was kidding about it.
The city manager later compared them to fire hall jokes, stemming from a locker room environment, an environment that for years remained common at the fire hall over the course of many chiefs.
Society has changed. What once was acceptable behavior is no longer acceptable behavior.
In an interview with us earlier this year, Pete Peterson pledged to put an end to that behavior.
Everyone in the fire hall needs to really be careful about how they act and what they say, because we will not tolerate a hostile work environment.
Sergeant Sagers told us he hopes his story spares others the damage he's experienced. Since the city named Scott fire chief in September 2011, Sagers says a note from his clinical psychologist to the EEOC reveals he's had 24 treatment sessions that increasingly focused on stress at work related to the department administration, Almost all of the sessions since 2014, at least partially relating to inappropriate administrative actions. The stress became too much in April of this year, when Sager says a psychiatrist sent this note, revealing he was under a doctor's care for stress, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, warning his symptoms have become excessive and that he needed to take a medical leave of absence.
Over the years, he's been cheerful, happy, looks forward to coming to work. You know, Mike Sagers was very passionate about this job. He loved coming to the fire service. Even you could tell every day he walked in the door, he was happy to be there.
Firefighter Association President Charlie Ely says firefighters have noticed a change.
He's just not the Mike Sagers that everybody knows. He just doesn't seem as energetic about the fire department and the fire service, and he just seems kind of down about it.
Ely hopes City Hall takes notice too.
I don't think they're taking it as seriously as they should be.
Because he sees a man who spent more than 25 years laying his life on the line to save the lives of others, slowly and painfully losing his own life in the process. According to Sergeant Sager's EEOC complaint, the city sent him to several of their own doctors for mental and physical evaluations. Josh?
Nate, you reached out to City Hall, you reached out to the chief to let them sound off on this. What did you hear from them?
All right, so the attorney that represents the city in this matter declined comment, citing Sergeant Sager's right to privacy when it comes to his medical records. In an email, Earl Boozy told us, quote, due to the nature of information contained in personal medical records, HIPAA regulations prohibit the dissemination or discussion of an employee's medical records. In fact, I do not think that Sergeant Sagers would want the city to make any public comments about his private medical records.
Nearly 3,000 firefighters from across the nation are expected to vote to formally voice their disapproval of the Johnson City Fire Chief Mark Scott this week.
And Nate Morabito found out the International Association of Firefighters is considering a censure or formal resolution against the chief.
It's actually a done deal. Just moments ago, a firefighter from Johnson City who was at that conference told me this resolution passed unanimously. It was one of the items on the agenda for the International Association of Firefighters in Las Vegas. Let's show you a copy of that resolution that was requested by the Johnson City Firefighters Association. The draft said Chief Mark Scott has made decisions and taken actions that are detrimental to firefighters and to the safety of citizens, has made degrading and derogatory remarks towards multiple members, including chief officers, that directly affect their positions, and mentioned the fact that he possibly violated department policy by abusing a subordinate. The resolution follows a Johnson City internal investigation that did not substantiate workplace harassment, but did find the chief may have abused a subordinate. Throughout the process, the city manager has supported the chief, while the Fire Association has continued to raise concerns.
It's kind of hard to swallow some of the stuff that's been said from, you know, the city administration, and just how they kind of brushed everything off, so to speak.
Fire chief has done an extraordinary job in increasing the service levels provided to the citizens, and our job number one is to ensure that we have quality services for the citizens of Johnson City.
Now that this censure has passed unanimously, the International Association of Firefighters plans on sending the censure to Chief Scott. The annual conference is set to wrap up, by the way, Friday.
We reached out to a city spokesperson and the chief about the possible resolution. After the city manager reviewed the resolution, which he learned about from us, Pete Peterson said in a statement, the city does not recognize the IAFF and therefore has no comment on this matter.
And another Johnson City firefighter is accusing the department's chief of harassment and discrimination, and this time it's one of his assistant chiefs.
Yeah, Nate Morabito found out Assistant Chief Jerome Palmer handed over his documented concerns after Chief Mark Scott recently gave him the worst review of his 22-year career.
That's right. Palmer is the same firefighter who, according to an internal investigation, was previously the subject of the chief's possible abuse. While the city never punished the chief, we've learned the assistant chief is now on probation, the result of a review that determined overall he needs improvement. A rating Palmer appealed, firing back in the process.
It was really phenomenal right now.
That's what Jerome Palmer told us in October 2014, after the chief named him Johnson City's newest assistant fire chief.
I look forward to accepting the challenges and being a humble servant leader.
Almost 2 years later, he faces a new challenge.
He referred to Jerome as Gomer Powell the whole time that I worked over there.
Long after an internal investigation concluded the chief possibly abused him as a subordinate when referring to Palmer with that nickname,
Regretfully so, I said it. And Jerome is not that person.
Palmer documented other concerns, only turning them in after receiving this evaluation, a review he called the worst of his career. While Palmer managed firefighters at this house fire earlier this week, this evaluation sat in his personnel file. During his most recent review, Chief Mark Scott questioned Palmer's ability to provide the responsibility, dedication, and leadership for the position. He criticized his ability to get work done in a timely manner, measure success, work as a team player, and hold firefighters accountable. The chief also raised concerns that Palmer often doesn't make it into work on snow days, and that he routinely goes out of town on his weekend days off, more than other supervisors, and doesn't clearly communicate who is in charge while he's away. In the end, he questioned if Palmer's willing to accept the level of responsibility that is required after his shift ends and on holidays, even saying the man failed to get a grant application filed in time because he was out of town. Palmer, who supervises more than 100 firefighters as the Assistant Chief of Operations, signed the evaluation, but made it clear he did not agree with it, and then attached this document. It not only responds to the chief's criticism about his work, but takes things a step further, calling out the chief for unprofessional comments and behavior. Palmer, whose wife is expecting a child next month, documented statements reportedly from the chief about the Family and Medical Leave Act. Comments like it's for, quote, wimps and sissies that take off to be with their families and babies, end quote, and that the, quote, wimpy guys take off on FMLA for a baby, end quote. Also saying the chief was responsible for religious discrimination by not properly communicating with him so he could leave work in time to observe Passover. In addition, he said the chief is harassing his personal life by questioning the times he's away from work on his time off, denying the allegation that he doesn't communicate with others before he leaves. He called his evaluation a vote of no confidence, citing a hostile work environment and calling the review a personal attack, saying the chief never made him aware of his deficiencies. Now, the chief responded to Palmer's appeal by saying the evaluation is not a character appraisal, noting he gave him positive ratings in the areas he met expectations, complimenting him at times too. In the end, the Human Resources Director, with the City Manager's approval, upheld that Palmer overall needs improvement. But the HR Director did promise he would work personally with the Chief to close the apparent communication gap.
Nate, in light of everything that's happened with the chief, the internal investigation, the vote of no confidence that he received last week by an international association of firefighters, I know you asked to see his file. What did you find?
Yeah, we were looking to see what his last review looked like. Well, since becoming chief, we learned Mark Scott has never received a formal written evaluation. Instead, a city spokesperson told us, like all the city managers' direct reports, the city manager meets with the chief weekly or every 2 weeks or so to go over his performance, review goals, objectives, and identify any areas where he might need improvement.
Well, city leaders are now acknowledging problems within the Johnson City Fire Department after our community watchdog began asking questions.
And city leaders are also demanding the city manager come up with a plan to address the ongoing issues. Nate Morabito found out the city commission gave the city manager that order during his most recent evaluation.
I don't think it's an epidemic as perhaps some of the folks in the Fire Bureau would like to present it to be.
That's what City Manager Pete Peterson told us in April, after an internal investigation raised concerns about the leadership and behavior of Johnson City's fire chief and the overall morale in the department.
I do not think it's that big of an issue.
More than 4 months later, city commissioners now consider it a big issue. In Pete Peterson's most recent evaluation, his bosses listed developing an effective employee relations strategy for the fire department as number 2 on his list of objectives for the next year.
The commission's made it very clear, we're not going to referee this. You all are all big boys and girls. We want you all to do your job, sit down at the table, let's resolve the differences, let's resolve any conflict, let's create some solutions.
A review of Peterson's 45-page evaluation reveals general comments from every city commissioner about the lack of accountability at City Hall, especially for employees and department heads who don't perform or act unprofessional, Commissioner Jenny Brock specifically told Peterson she'd like to see him work harder to deal with the issues in the fire department and establish a mutually respectful environment.
Bottom line is sit down and work it out, try to get on some common ground, and let's move forward.
Finally, somebody has our back.
Firefighters consider the directive a good sign for the future of the department and city.
We like to thank the City Commission for finally addressing that there is an issue, especially in the fire department. They are finally holding Mr. Peterson accountable.
Johnson City Professional Firefighters Association President Charlie Ely says it's long overdue. It comes just weeks after the International Association gave the fire chief a vote of no confidence, and after his assistant chief also raised concerns about his behavior.
I think that shows, that the City Commission's serious, that this is an issue and it needs to be addressed immediately.
According to Peterson's evaluation, commissioners want him to report his strategy back to leaders by October 20th. In Johnson City, Nate Morabito, News Channel 11, in your corner.
And within the last hour, Pete Peterson shared his reaction to the evaluation in general and the specific directive to address the fire department situation. Here's what he told us.
Every employee can always perform better, and this is my opportunity to perform better in their eyes. I mean, we've got a multitude of things to work towards in this organization, and that's just another one of the issues that we want to make improvements on this year.
Pete Peterson, within the last few moments, his evaluation is posted on WJHL.com along with commissioners' comments about the evaluation.